Welcome to Should Have Known It, where we present 15-minute videos of things you definitely should have known. Hi, welcome to Shoulda Known It. I'm Miss Aoki, and today's topic is the frequency illusion. The natural explanation, the one that bubbles up without effort, is that the word genuinely became more popular right after you learned it, or that people around you could somehow sense your new knowledge and began using it to connect with you. These are not as silly as they sound. Humans are pattern seekers by deep evolutionary necessity, and coincidence always feels personal when you're the one standing in the middle of it. But the honest accounting runs like this: that word was always there. It appeared in books you read, conversations you half listened to, articles you skimmed. It just meant nothing to you, so your brain quietly filed it under irrelevant and moved on. The moment you learned it, you gave the brain a new filter criterion, and suddenly that previously invisible signal started breaking through. The gap between what is actually happening in the world and what your brain reports to you is happening is frankly enormous, and the frequency illusion is one of the cleanest demonstrations we have of that gap. It makes the hidden work of attention suddenly, briefly visible like a flashlight sweep across an otherwise dark room. The phenomenon has two names. The formal name, coined by psychologist Arnold Zwicky at Stanford in 2006, is the frequency illusion. But the name most people encounter first is Baader-Meinhof, and the story behind that name is itself a small lesson in the illusion. In 1994, a commenter on the St. Paul Pioneer Press discussion board mentioned that he had heard about the Baader-Meinhof group, the West German far-left militant organization active in the 1970s, for the first time, and then heard it again the very next day. He found this uncanny enough to write about. Other readers replied the same thing had happened to them. Someone suggested calling it the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. The name stuck purely because it was the example at hand. What's lovely about this origin is that it's entirely recursive. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon was itself named by people experiencing the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, the strange déjà vu of newly learned information suddenly appearing twice in a row. The commenter wasn't special. He'd simply never encountered that particular phrase before, and so his brain had been discarding it on sight. Once he learned it, the filter changed. Zwicky cataloged this alongside a family of related cognitive effects, what he called selective attention, coupled with confirmation bias. You notice the hits and forget the misses. You don't count the 50 times you heard something after learning a word and it wasn't that word. You count the 3 times it was. This asymmetry is doing most of the work. There is a physical structure in your brain that is responsible for all of this, and it deserves a moment of specific attention. The reticular activating system, or RAS, is a bundle of neurons in the brainstem, roughly thumb-sized, that acts as the gatekeeper between the raw sensory flood coming in and the conscious experience you actually have. Your senses are delivering approximately 11 million bits of information per second to your nervous system. Your conscious mind can process somewhere between 40 and 50 of those bits. The RAS is what decides which 40 bits make the cut. It is, in the most literal sense, the editor of your reality, and it takes its editorial cues from what you've recently told it to care about. The RAS is why, at a loud party, you can hear your own name spoken across the room, even through a wall of noise. It's why a new parent wakes at the slightest sound from their infant's room but sleeps through a thunderstorm. It's why a carpenter walking down a street notices every door's joinery, while a landscape architect notices only the tree canopy. They are standing in the same street. They are not seeing the same street. The RAS doesn't care about truth or accuracy. It cares about relevance. As you have defined relevance by your recent experiences, fears, desires, and choices. Once you buy the Subaru Outback, your RAS has a new criterion: Subaru Outback. It starts flagging them. It was flagging Hyundai Tucsons and Honda Pilots before your purchase, but those no longer feel like they're everywhere because you no longer care about them in the same charged way. The frequency illusion doesn't operate alone. Layered on top of the RAS's newly tuned filter is confirmation bias, the cognitive tendency to weight evidence that confirms what we already believe far more heavily than evidence that contradicts it. Together, these two mechanisms create a closed loop. Your brain promotes matching instances to conscious awareness. Your consciousness logs those instances as data. Your judgment system uses that data to confirm that yes, this thing really is everywhere, which causes you to pay even more attention to it. which surfaces even more instances. The loop runs quietly, efficiently, without any sense that something has gone sideways. This is the part that carries real stakes. The frequency illusion feels like observation. It feels like gathering evidence from the world. It is not gathering evidence from the world. It is gathering evidence from your filter, which is a fundamentally different thing. And the difference matters enormously if you're trying to think clearly about anything. One documented domain where this bites hard is medical self-diagnosis. A person reads about a disease, say Lyme disease or a particular autoimmune condition, and suddenly starts noticing symptoms that match. Some of those symptoms may be real, but the noticing is being amplified by the filter, not by any increase in symptom frequency. The condition may not have changed at all. The attention has. Marketers have understood the RAS without always using that name for decades. The principle behind retargeted advertising is precisely this. Once you've looked at a product, your filter is primed, and now you'll notice that product in your peripheral vision when you're browsing other websites. The ad network isn't following you because it's surveilling you in a sinister way. It's surfacing something your RAS is already primed to recognize. Both things can be true simultaneously. Political news consumption shows the same pattern with alarming fidelity. A person who has recently become convinced that crime rates are rising will suddenly notice crime stories everywhere in the local paper, on social media, in conversation. Crime coverage may not have increased at all, but now that the belief is in place, the RAS promotes every matching story, and the confirmation bias tallies them. Within weeks, the person has a rich subjective dataset confirming their view. That dataset was assembled by their own filter, not by the world. The deflating truth is this: we are all doing this all the time, about many things simultaneously. There is no position outside the filter. There is no uncurated perception. Every single thing you have ever concluded about the frequency of anything in your environment has been mediated by a reticular gatekeeper that was itself shaped by your prior experiences, your fears, your purchases, and your recent conversations. The raw feed is not available to you. You have never seen it. Zwicky used the word illusion very carefully. It's not that you're hallucinating the word or imagining the Subarus. The encounters are real. The error is in the inference. The leap from I keep noticing X to X must be more common now. That leap feels airtight because the noticing feels like objective observation, but noticing is always already filtered, and filtered evidence cannot tell you about base rates. The classic way to see this clearly is to ask, how many times did you hear that word in the 2 weeks before you learned it? You have no idea. Your memory contains 0 instances because the filter wasn't logging them. You can't compare after to before because the before data was never collected. You're looking at a graph where only the right half of the x-axis has any numbers on it, and concluding from that half graph that there's been a recent spike. And this is where it gets philosophically uncomfortable. The same asymmetry applies to essentially every pattern you've ever noticed in your life. Every time you've thought a particular type of person is rudely common, or a particular coincidence keeps happening to you, or a certain restaurant always seems to be closed when you walk by, you're working from a filtered, post hoc weighted sample and calling it evidence. There's a specific flavor of the illusion that language researchers find especially interesting: the new word effect. When adults acquire a new vocabulary item, particularly in a second language, but also in their first, they go through a recognition latency window of roughly 1 to 3 weeks during which that word appears with uncanny frequency. This has been studied carefully enough to rule out the simpler explanation. Researchers at Edinburgh and at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics have tracked corpus frequencies, actual appearances of target words in news feeds and podcasts, and cross-referenced them with subjective frequency reports from learners. The words don't spike in actual usage. The subjective experience of frequency spikes dramatically. The illusion is robust, measurable, and independent of the actual word frequency. What makes this useful for language learners is the flip side of the illusion. It works. If you want to consolidate a new word, the RAS's priming behavior means you will encounter it in natural context far more often than a naive count of your reading material would predict, because now you're counting what the filter promotes. That's genuinely good news for vocabulary acquisition. The illusion does real cognitive work, even while being an illusion. Here's where I want to be precise, because I think this matters. Knowing the name frequency illusion or Baader-Meinhof, whichever you prefer, does not make you immune to the effect. Your RAS doesn't shut off because you took a psychology course. But naming the illusion gives you a small but real cognitive handle that you can grab in the moment, and that handle changes what's possible. The next time you feel that electric shock of "this word is everywhere now," you have a choice you didn't have before. You can ask, is this the frequency illusion? Is my filter new? Have I recently bought something, learned something, feared something, wanted something that would retune the RAS? That question interrupts the automatic leap from noticing to concluding. It doesn't eliminate the noticing. And it shouldn't, because noticing is useful. It just breaks the inferential chain. This is, I would argue, one of the higher value uses of cognitive vocabulary in general, not to feel superior, not to dismiss your own experience as just a bias, but to expand the set of interpretations available to you when something surprising happens. Instead of only the universe is speaking to me in pure coincidence, you now have a third option: my filter changed. That's a richer and more accurate account of what's happening in your mind. Let's be concrete about how to use this. You buy a Subaru Outback or a Volvo or a forest green bicycle, it doesn't matter, and suddenly that make and color seems to be everywhere. Instead of concluding these must be very popular, pause and ask, how many of these did I notice in the month before the purchase? The honest answer is probably far fewer, and the ones you did notice were being processed but not logged in conscious memory. The same applies to beliefs that feel recently confirmed. If you've just read a news story that reinforced a view you hold about the economy, about a group of people, about a trend, and then you immediately begin noticing other confirming stories, apply the same pause. Your filter is primed. The confirming stories may be completely real, but their apparent frequency is a product of your filter's new sensitivity, not necessarily of a change in the world's base rate. And there's an affirmative version of this too, which I find genuinely useful. If you want to notice more kindness in your daily life, prime your filter deliberately. Spend 5 minutes in the morning naming one kind thing you witnessed the previous day. Your RAS will begin flagging kindness. You'll notice more of it everywhere. That's the illusion being harnessed rather than suffered. The filter doesn't care whether you primed it accidentally or on purpose. Carl Jung called meaningful coincidences synchronicities, events with no causal connection but striking subjective resonance. He meant something philosophically serious by this, and I don't want to flatten his thinking, but it is worth noting that a large fraction of what registers as synchronicity in everyday life is structurally identical to the frequency illusion. You are in a period of change. The changed filter promotes pattern matching instances. The instances feel charged with personal significance because they are happening to you right now at this specific juncture. This doesn't make the experience less meaningful. Experience isn't disqualified by being explicable, but it does suggest that the message from the universe, framing, and the filter tuning framing are not actually competing for the same territory. The filter tuning explains the mechanism. What you make of the experience, what it means to you, what you decide in response to it, is still entirely yours. Consider this. Every major life transition primes a new set of filters simultaneously. Falling in love, losing a job, moving to a new city, having a child, grieving someone, each of these resets the editorial criteria of the RAS all at once, which is why those periods in life feel so saturated with significance. The world seems to be speaking directly to your situation from every angle all the time. It is not. Your filter is simply working overtime. The frequency illusion is in some ways a toy version of a much larger epistemological problem. We cannot observe the world directly. Every perception is already interpreted, categorized, and filtered by a brain that is optimized for survival and relevance, not for accurate frequency estimation. The RAS is just one layer. Below it are the sensory transducers that throw away most of what hits them. Above it are the memory systems that preferentially encode emotionally salient events. The surprise isn't that we have the frequency illusion. The surprise is that we manage to calibrate our beliefs to reality at all. The scientific method, in one light, is just humanity's best attempt to build external verification systems that correct for exactly these internal distortions. Randomized trials, control groups, blinding, replication. These are all ways of asking, does this pattern exist in the world or does it exist in our filter? The frequency illusion is a gentle, everyday demonstration of why that question is necessary and why it is never trivial to answer. There's something quietly astonishing about the fact that the same neural architecture that makes you notice your name across a loud room, which is a genuine survival advantage, which your ancestors needed, is also the architecture that fills your world with apparent confirmations of whatever you happen to think about most recently, the same system. One elegant, economical, slightly unreliable system running everything. So here is what you take with you out of this room. The frequency illusion, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a feature of how attention works. Your brain genuinely cannot promote everything equally, and so it promotes what seems relevant. That is, on balance, useful, but it means that I keep noticing X is always a statement about your filter, not a direct report about the world's base rate. These are different statements, and conflating them is where the illusion does its most consequential work. In politics, in medicine, in financial decisions, in how we judge other people's behavior, in what we believe our experience is confirming. The handle the name gives you is this: when something feels suddenly everywhere, ask two questions. First, when did I first learn to care about this? Second, what can I do to find out the actual base rate, not the filtered experience of it? The first question names the mechanism. The second question respects both the mechanism and the world it's pointing at. Every word you learn today, Baader-Meinhof, reticular activating system, confirmation bias, selective attention, will now appear everywhere. I want you to know, when they do, that you are not being followed. You are not receiving a cosmic message. You are simply a person who now has better words for a thing that was always happening. And that, quietly, is enough. That's everything we have time for. The filter is already running. There's nothing to do but know it and carry that knowledge lightly. Good night. And that brings us to the end. Thank you for joining me and learning something new. Until next time, click like and subscribe.